The moment I saw Linda Peterson standing on my porch with that clipboard clutched to her chest like Holy Scripture, I knew my peaceful Tuesday evening was about to turn into a nightmare. I had just moved to Riverside Meadows, a quaint little subdivision in suburban Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, about 6 months earlier. The house was a steal, or so I thought. Xavier Richardson, that was me, proud new homeowner at 32 years old, finally escaping the rental market. The 3-bedroom colonial had everything I wanted: a decent yard, a garage workshop where I could tinker with my woodworking projects, and it was only 20 minutes from my job as an HVAC technician. That last detail would become critically important soon enough. Linda was somewhere in her mid-50s, with that particular haircut that screamed middle management at a soul-crushing corporation. You know the one. Blonde highlights, severely angled, shorter in the back. She wore a cream-colored blazer despite the October chill, and her smile had all the warmth of a funeral home director. "Mr. Richardson, do you have a moment?" she asked, though the question was clearly rhetorical since she was already consulting her clipboard. "Sure, what can I do for you?" "I'm Linda Peterson, president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. I've been meaning to catch you since you moved in. There are several violations we need to discuss." I leaned against the door frame. "Violations? Like what?" She flipped through her papers with practiced efficiency. "Your garbage cans are visible from the street on non-collection days. Your lawn was mowed to 3.5 inches when the maximum allowable height is 3 inches, and you have a wreath on your door that isn't from our approved seasonal decoration list." I stared at her. "You measured my grass." "The HOA takes community standards very seriously, Mr. Richardson. These standards protect all of our property values." She handed me a sheet of paper. "You have 14 days to remedy these violations or face fines starting at $50 per day per violation." I scanned the document, feeling my blood pressure rising. This wreath was a housewarming gift from my mother. I'm sure it's lovely, but rules are rules. Now, there's one more matter. Her smile somehow got even more artificial. "I noticed from the property records that your home's heating system extends to the small building in the back corner of your lot, the one right on the property line." "The old carriage house." "Yeah, I guess so. The previous owner used it for storage. I haven't really done anything with it yet." Linda's eyes lit up like a cat spotting a wounded bird. "That structure is actually partially on HOA common property, about 40% of it, according to the survey. The HOA has decided to convert it into a meeting hall for community gatherings. Since your heating system already services the building, we'll need you to continue providing heat throughout the winter months." I stood up straight. "Excuse me. It's in the HOA bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 4. Any shared structures with existing utilities must maintain those utilities for community use. You'll find it all in your covenant documents." "I never agreed to heat an HOA meeting hall. That's going to cost me a fortune in gas bills." Linda's smile never wavered. "The alternative is that we'd need to install a separate heating system, which would require trenching across your property, temporary loss of your driveway access, and potential damage to your landscaping. This way is so much simpler. The first meeting is scheduled for next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Please ensure the building is at least 68 degrees by 5:30. She turned and walked away before I could formulate a response, leaving me standing there with a fistful of violation notices and a growing sense that I'd made a terrible mistake buying in Riverside Meadows. That night, I dug out the massive folder of documents from my house closing. Sure enough, buried in page 67 of the HOA covenants, written in 8-point font, was the clause Linda had mentioned. I called my real estate attorney, Bill Morrison, the next morning. "Xavier, I'm going to level with you," Bill said after I explained the situation. "That clause is borderline unenforceable, but fighting it would cost you thousands in legal fees, and HOAs can make your life absolutely miserable if they want to. They can fine you into oblivion, and those fines can turn into liens on your property. So I'm just supposed to pay to heat their meeting hall. You could negotiate, offer to keep it at a lower temperature, or ask them to reimburse you for the extra heating costs. Maybe propose a compromise." I tried that. I really did. I sent Linda a certified letter suggesting the HOA pay for the additional gas usage, which I estimated at around $75 per month during the winter. She responded with a 2-page letter explaining that the HOA budget had no allocation for such expenses, and that I was contractually obligated to provide the heating at my own cost. She also reminded me that my garbage can violations remained unresolved, and that I now had additional fines for allowing leaves to accumulate on my lawn beyond the acceptable threshold of sporadic coverage. The Wednesday before their first meeting, I went to inspect the old carriage house. It was a drafty wooden structure, about 600 square feet, with ancient windows that probably hadn't been replaced since the 1940s. The heating system consisted of a single baseboard unit connected to my home's main gas furnace through an underground line. I checked the thermostat. Someone had already been inside and cranked it up to 75 degrees. My teeth ground together as I turned it down to 65. If they wanted heat, they'd get the minimum. The meeting happened as planned. I watched from my kitchen window as a parade of my neighbors filed into the carriage house, Linda leading them like a general marshalling troops. I counted at least 20 people. The meeting lasted 3 hours, and I could hear the murmur of voices carrying across my yard the entire time. The next morning, Linda was back on my porch. "Mr. Richardson, the temperature in the meeting hall was unacceptably cold yesterday evening. Several of our elderly members were quite uncomfortable. I kept it at 65 degrees. That's reasonable for a drafty old building. The HOA board has voted to require a minimum temperature of 72 degrees for all meetings. You'll find the motion in the meeting minutes, which will be posted to the community portal by end of business today. Linda, I can't afford to heat that building to 72 degrees. Do you have any idea how much that'll cost with those old windows? Then perhaps you should have considered that before purchasing a property with HOA covenants." "Good day, Mr. Richardson." I called Bill again. He sighed heavily when he heard my voice. "Xavier, they can set reasonable standards for common areas. 72 degrees is within the range of reasonable, even if it's on the high end. You could try attending an HOA meeting and voicing your concerns. Can I just shut off the heat to the building? Absolutely not. That would be a breach of the covenants, and they could sue you for damages and specific performance. Don't go down that road." But the seed was planted. I'm an HVAC technician. I know heating systems better than just about anyone. And as I thought about the situation more and more, a darker idea began to form. The carriage house was a shared structure, right? 40% on HOA land, 60% on mine. The heating system that serviced it ran entirely through my property, connected to my furnace, powered by my gas bill. The HOA wanted me to maintain that system at my expense to suit their purposes. What if that system stopped working? Not because I turned it off, but because of a cold weather failure. These things happened all the time. Pipes burst. Systems failed. And the HOA would be left with a cold meeting hall right in the middle of winter, with no legal leg to stand on to force me to fix it quickly. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'm not going to pretend I didn't do it either. The following week, Linda sent out an email blast to the entire neighborhood announcing a holiday planning committee meeting scheduled for the third week of November. Temperature would be maintained at a comfortable 72 degrees, refreshments would be provided, all residents encouraged to attend. My gas bill for October arrived. It was $147 higher than the previous month, and October had been mild. I calculated what December and January would cost, with the thermostat cranked to 72 in a building with no insulation and single-pane windows. I was looking at potentially $300 to $400 extra per month during the coldest parts of winter. I made my decision on November 10th. The forecast called for a hard freeze that night, with temperatures dropping to 15 degrees. I waited until after midnight, then went down to my basement where the main shut-off valve for the heating line to the carriage house was located. It was a simple quarter-turn ball valve, painted red, clearly marked. I closed it. Then I went back upstairs, made sure my own heat was working fine, and went to bed. The thermostat in the carriage house would keep calling for heat, but no hot water would flow through the pipes. The temperature would drop. The pipes, still full of water, would freeze. And when frozen pipes thaw, they crack. The freeze came right on schedule. By morning, the temperature in Pittsburgh had dropped to 12 degrees, the coldest November day in 15 years according to the news. I went to work, came home, and said nothing to anyone. Linda showed up 3 days later, and this time she wasn't alone. She had brought Derek Walsh, the HOA vice president, and Margaret Chen, the treasurer. All three of them looked furious. "Mr. Richardson, you shut off the heat to the meeting hall," Linda said without preamble. "No, I didn't. The heat's been on." I gestured toward the basement. "The thermostat's been set to 72 just like you demanded. Then why is the building currently 42 degrees? Derek demanded. He was a stocky guy in his 60s, retired from something involving middle management based on his love of business casual attire. "I don't know. Maybe the system's not working. These old heating lines are pretty unreliable. We need you to fix it immediately," Margaret said. She was the quietest of the three, but her voice carried an edge. "The holiday planning meeting is in 1 week. I'll take a look at it when I have time. I've been pretty busy at work." "This is your responsibility," Linda snapped. "Actually, Linda, I think you'll find that maintaining the building structure is the HOA's responsibility since it sits on common property. I'm only obligated to provide heat, not to repair systems that fail due to age and weather conditions. That's a maintenance issue, not a utility provision issue." I'd done my homework. Bill had explained the distinction after I'd asked him some very careful hypothetical questions. Linda's face went red. "You did this deliberately." "Did what?" "I'm not responsible for cold weather. If the heating system failed because of the freeze, that's an act of nature. Maybe if the HOA had properly winterized the building, insulated those windows, or maintained the structure better, this wouldn't have happened. We demand you fix this immediately. I'll add it to my to-do list. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do." I closed the door in their faces. My hands were shaking, but I felt a grim satisfaction. They wanted to play hardball with bylaws and covenants. I could play that game too. The next morning, I received a formal letter from the HOA threatening legal action if I didn't restore heat to the meeting hall within 48 hours. I responded through Bill's office with a letter explaining that I had not turned off any heating systems, that I had maintained the thermostat at the required temperature, and that any mechanical failures of aging infrastructure were not my responsibility to repair on an emergency timeline. I offered to fix the system at my earliest convenience, which might be sometime in early spring given my work schedule. Linda lost her mind. Over the next week, I received daily letters, emails, and phone calls. Other HOA board members started showing up at my door. They threatened fines, lawsuits, and liens. I documented everything and forwarded it all to Bill. "They're getting desperate," he told me during one call. "But legally, they don't have much standing. You're technically right that system repairs aren't covered under the utility provision clause. It's a gray area, and they'd have to sue you to force the issue, which would take months. What about their meetings? They'll have to find another location or postpone them. Not your problem. The holiday planning meeting got canceled." Linda sent out a bitter email explaining that due to equipment failure caused by a resident's negligence, they would be meeting at the community center in the adjacent town instead, which charged a $75 rental fee. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. In early December, I came home from work to find a repair truck in my driveway. Two guys were running a hose from the truck toward my backyard. I jogged over to them. "Hey, what are you doing?" The older of the two workers looked up. "HOA hired us to fix the heating system in the building out back. We're going to flush the lines and repair any breaks." "On whose authority?" "That system runs through my house." He shrugged. "Lady named Linda gave us the work order and the gate code, said it was HOA property." "The heating system isn't HOA property. It's connected to my furnace. You need to leave. Now." The worker looked uncomfortable. "Look, man, we're just trying to do a job. I understand, but you don't have my permission to access my heating system. If the HOA wants repairs done, they need to go through proper channels. Please pack up your equipment." After some grumbling, they left. I immediately changed my gate code and sent another letter through Bill's office explaining that any unauthorized access to my property or my home's systems would be treated as trespassing. Linda showed up that evening, absolutely livid. "You turned away the repair workers. Do you have any idea how much we're paying in community center rental fees? You hired workers to access my private heating system without my permission. That's not okay, Linda. The building is on HOA property. The heating system is not. It's part of my home's infrastructure. You want heat in that building, you can install your own system. Or you can wait until I get around to fixing it, which, as I've said, probably won't be until spring. This is ridiculous. You're being completely unreasonable." "No, Linda. What's unreasonable is demanding I pay hundreds of dollars per month to heat your meeting hall. What's unreasonable is fining me for having garbage cans visible and measuring my grass height. You wanted to play games with rules and regulations, so here we are. You want that building heated, install your own system. We don't have the budget for that. Then I guess you'll be renting the community center for a while." She tried a different tack, suddenly softening her voice. "Xavier, please be reasonable. Can't we work something out? What if the HOA paid for the repairs? The repairs I'll do myself when I'm ready. What I want is for you to leave me alone. No more violation notices for nonsense. No more demands about heating the meeting hall. You want to use that building? Fine. But you're going to have to actually negotiate with me like a reasonable person instead of trying to bully me with bylaws. The covenants are clear. Then sue me. But I think you'll find that a judge is going to ask why the HOA can't install their own heating system for a building on their own property. And they're going to wonder why you think it's reasonable to force a homeowner to subsidize your meetings to the tune of thousands of dollars per year." Linda left without another word, but her expression promised this wasn't over. Christmas came and went. The HOA canceled 3 more meetings. The community center rental fees were adding up, and I heard through neighborhood gossip that several residents were questioning why they were paying HOA dues. if the association couldn't even maintain a meeting space. In January, during a particularly brutal cold snap, I finally went out to assess the actual damage to the heating system. As I'd expected, the pipes had cracked in multiple places. Water damage had ruined some of the drywall in the carriage house. It was a mess. I documented everything with photos and videos. The damage was consistent with freeze-related failure. No one could prove I'd deliberately allowed it to happen, and the building's poor winterization made it entirely plausible that this was just bad luck and old infrastructure meeting extreme weather. Linda must have realized she was losing because she changed tactics. In late January, I received a notice that the HOA board had scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss amending community covenants regarding shared utility structures. All homeowners were required to attend. I showed up at the community center on the designated evening. About 30 residents were there, along with the full HOA board. Linda stood at the front of the room with a PowerPoint presentation ready to go. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We're here tonight to discuss a critical issue affecting our community. As many of you know, the former carriage house on the Richardson property, which serves as our community meeting hall, has experienced heating system failure. Mr. Richardson has refused to repair the system in a timely manner." Several residents glanced my way. I kept my expression neutral. Linda continued, "The board proposes amending the covenants to require homeowners with shared structures to maintain all systems in working order within 72 hours of failure, with daily fines of $200 for non-compliance. This will ensure situations like this don't occur in the future." An older gentleman named Frank raised his hand. "Linda, why can't the HOA just install its own heating system in the building?" "That would cost approximately $12,000, Frank. We don't have that in the budget." "But we're spending $75 every time we rent the community center, right? That's going to add up. And you want to fine Xavier $200 per day. That seems excessive." "The fine is meant to encourage compliance." A woman named Patricia spoke up. "I've lived here 15 years and I've seen the HOA fine people for all kinds of minor stuff. But Xavier has a point. Why should he have to pay to heat a building for HOA meetings? That's not fair." "It's in the covenants," Linda said, her voice tight. "Then maybe the covenants are wrong," Patricia shot back. The meeting dissolved into arguments. I stayed quiet and let it happen. It turned out I wasn't the only person in Riverside Meadows who had issues with the HOA's aggressive enforcement of minor violations. Once people started talking, story after story came out. Fines for Christmas decorations left up 2 days too long. Violations for mailbox posts that were the wrong shade of white. Threats of liens for basketball hoops in driveways. Derek tried to regain control. These rules exist to protect property values. If we don't maintain standards, the whole neighborhood suffers. "Property values," Frank laughed. "My neighbor got fined $300 last summer because his fence was 6 inches too tall. He had to rebuild the entire thing. That didn't help his property value any." The proposed covenant amendment failed to get the required 2/3 vote. In fact, it failed to get even a simple majority. Only about 1/3 of the residents supported it, mostly Linda's close friends and allies. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to talk to me. "Xavier, I'm sorry you've been dealing with this," Patricia said. "Linda's been out of control for years, but most of us just pay the fines and try to stay off her radar. I'm glad someone finally stood up to her." Frank nodded. "If you need anything, let me know. I used to be a contractor. I could help you install a separate heating system for that building if you wanted." "Actually," I said, "I've been thinking about that. What if we turned this situation around completely? Over the next few weeks, I had multiple conversations with Frank and several other neighbors. A plan started to form. The carriage house sat partially on HOA common property, but 60% of it was on my land. The heating system failure had made it unusable. What if, instead of repairing the old system, I renovated the portion on my property and turned it into something else entirely? A workshop, maybe, or a home gym. The HOA would be left with 40% of a building and no way to heat it, but there was a better option. What if I offered to sell my portion of the building to the HOA for a reasonable price, and they could do whatever they wanted with it? I had Bill draft up a proposal. I would sell my 60% stake in the carriage house for $8,000, which was below market value for the square footage. The HOA would then own the entire building and could install whatever heating system they wanted without needing my cooperation. Additionally, I wanted all outstanding violations against my property dropped, and a written agreement that the HOA would not pursue any further action regarding the heating system failure. Linda rejected it immediately. The HOA doesn't have $8,000 in discretionary funds, and I'm not going to recommend spending that much to buy you out of a responsibility you're trying to dodge. Then I guess we're at an impasse, I replied. But I sent copies of the proposal to every homeowner in Riverside Meadows, along with a detailed timeline of everything that had happened. The gas bills showing the extra costs, the threatening letters from Linda, the unauthorized attempt to access my property. Everything. The neighborhood exploded. It turned out that when people saw the actual numbers, the idea that Linda had been demanding I pay $300 to $400 per month to heat an HOA meeting hall seemed insane. Support for the HOA board collapsed. An emergency recall election was organized in March. Linda, Derek, and Margaret all lost their seats. The new board president was Patricia, and Frank became vice president. Their first official act was to accept my buyout proposal, using a combination of HOA reserves and a small special assessment. They then hired a contractor to properly renovate the carriage house, including new windows, insulation, and a modern, efficient heating system that cost another $15,000. But Linda wasn't done. In April, I received notice that she was suing me personally for damages. She claimed that my deliberate sabotage of the heating system had cost the HOA over $3,000 in community center rental fees, plus the cost of repairs and renovations. She wanted $30,000 in damages. This was where things got interesting. Bill had warned me this might happen. "She's going to have to prove you deliberately sabotaged the system," he explained. "Can she do that?" The valve was shut off. Anyone who inspected the system carefully enough would have found that. Did anyone inspect it? Not to my knowledge. After the freeze, I opened the valve back up before I took my photos and videos. The damage was already done by then. Then she has no proof. It's her word against yours, and all the evidence suggests the system failed due to cold weather and poor maintenance of an old building. The lawsuit dragged on for months. Linda hired a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. They tried to subpoena my gas bills to prove usage had dropped, but my bills showed consistent usage because I'd kept my home heated normally. The thermostat in the carriage house had been set to 72 degrees, exactly as required. The fact that no heat was actually reaching the building because of a closed valve wasn't something they could prove. Her lawyer tried another angle. Mr. Richardson is an HVAC technician. He would have known that closing the valve would cause the pipes to freeze and burst. "I never closed any valve," I testified during my deposition. "The system failed during extreme cold weather. If someone closed a valve, it wasn't me." Maybe it was closed for maintenance by the previous owner and no one realized it. That's convenient. What's convenient is that the HOA demanded I heat their meeting hall at my expense. I said no, and suddenly they're claiming I sabotaged their building. This is retaliation, pure and simple. They couldn't prove anything. The case went before a judge in September, nearly a year after the initial freeze. Bill presented our defense methodically: the poorly maintained building, the extreme cold weather, the unreasonable demands that I subsidize HOA meetings, the attempted unauthorized access to my property, the pattern of aggressive HOA enforcement under Linda's leadership. The judge was not impressed with Linda's case. "Miss Peterson, you're asking me to believe that Mr. Richardson deliberately sabotaged a heating system, but you have no physical evidence of this. No witnesses saw him close any valves. No expert testimony definitively states this was sabotage rather than equipment failure. What you have is speculation and circumstantial evidence based on the fact that Mr. Richardson had the knowledge to do what you're claiming. That's not sufficient for a civil judgment. Your Honor, he had motive and opportunity. Half the residents of Riverside Meadows had motive based on the testimony I've heard about your HOA's enforcement practices. Case dismissed." I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I'd won the lottery. Linda stood in the hallway, her face pale. "You deliberately destroyed that heating system," she said quietly. "Prove it," I replied. But the story still wasn't over. In October, more than a year after the original incident, I received a call from Bill. "Xavier, you need to know something. Linda Peterson has been arrested." "What?" "For what?" "Embezzlement. The new HOA board hired a forensic accountant to review the books. Turns out Linda had been skimming money from the HOA for years. Small amounts, a few hundred here, a few hundred there, but it added up. They found over $40,000 missing." I sat down heavily. "She was stealing from the HOA while demanding I pay to heat the meeting hall because they didn't have budget. Looks like it. She'd been covering it up by keeping budgets tight and pushing for fines to increase revenue. The police are involved now. She's looking at serious charges." The case made the local news. Linda Peterson, former HOA president of Riverside Meadows, arrested for embezzling over $42,000 from homeowner dues. The investigation revealed she'd been falsifying records, creating fake vendor invoices, and pocketing the money for years. During the criminal investigation, more details emerged. Linda had been living beyond her means, struggling with credit card debt, and trying to maintain an appearance of wealth she didn't have. The HOA presidency had given her access to funds with minimal oversight, and she'd taken full advantage. I was called to testify at her trial the following spring. Not about the heating system that wasn't relevant to the embezzlement charges, but about her management of the HOA and the pressure tactics she'd used. She demanded you pay to heat the meeting hall rather than allocating HOA funds for it. The prosecutor asked. Yes, she said the budget couldn't accommodate it, and you later learned she'd been embezzling from those same funds. Yes. So she was potentially stealing money that could have been used to properly maintain the building or install an appropriate heating system. Objection, speculation, Linda's defense attorney called out. Sustained, the judge said, but I think we all see the point. Linda was convicted on multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the Riverside Meadows HOA. Her house went into foreclosure within months. Derek and Margaret, the other board members, weren't charged with crimes, but the investigation revealed they'd been grossly negligent in their oversight. They'd never questioned Linda's financial reports, never asked for detailed accounting, just rubber-stamped whatever she presented. They both quietly moved out of the neighborhood within a year. As for me, I settled into a peaceful existence in Riverside Meadows. Patricia and Frank ran the HOA with actual common sense. Enforcement of rules became reasonable. Fines were used as a last resort, not a first response. The neighborhood actually became pleasant to live in. The renovated carriage house became a genuine community asset. With proper insulation and an efficient heating system, it cost the HOA about $50 a month in utilities. They held meetings there, hosted neighborhood gatherings, and even started renting it out for small events, which brought in additional revenue. Frank helped me build a proper workshop in my garage. Patricia became a good friend. I even started attending HOA meetings occasionally, though I never ran for the board. I'd had enough of that drama. On a cold evening in December, 2 years after the original pipe incident, I was having coffee with Frank in my kitchen. We could see the carriage house through the window, all lit up for a holiday party. "You ever feel guilty about what you did?" Frank asked. "Closing that valve." I'd never admitted it to anyone, but Frank was perceptive. We'd become close enough that I trusted him. Should I? "I'm not judging, just curious." I thought about it. Linda was a bully and a thief. She was using the HOA to push people around and line her pockets. If I hadn't stood up to her, someone else would have eventually. Or maybe they wouldn't have, and she'd still be stealing and making everyone's lives miserable. You couldn't have known she was embezzling. No, but I knew she was unreasonable. I knew the demands she was making were wrong. Yeah, I took a risk with the pipes. Could have backfired badly. But sometimes you have to take a stand. "Just admit you wanted revenge," I laughed. "Okay, fine. I wanted revenge." She measured my grass, Frank. She sent me violation notices for a wreath my mother gave me. And then she demanded I pay hundreds of dollars a month to heat her meeting hall while she was stealing from the HOA funds. Yeah, I wanted revenge, and I got it. Was it worth it? Every penny of those legal fees and every gray hair I got from stress. Honestly, yeah, it was worth it. Because now we have an HOA that actually serves the community instead of terrorizing it. Because Linda's in prison where she belongs. And because I learned that sometimes the rules aren't fair, and when that happens, you have to be creative. Frank raised his coffee mug. To creative solutions. I clinked my mug against his. To creative solutions. Through the window, I watched neighbors arriving for the holiday party, laughing and chatting as they made their way into the warmly lit carriage house. The building that had started this whole mess was now exactly what it should have been all along. A place that brought the community together instead of tearing it apart. My gas bill that month was normal. My lawn was whatever height I wanted it to be. My garbage can sat visible in my driveway, and no one cared. My mother's wreath hung on my door. And somewhere in a minimum security federal prison in Pennsylvania, Linda Peterson was learning that bullying people and stealing their money has consequences. I'd won. Not just against Linda, but against the whole idea that an HOA could abuse its power without pushback. The story spread through Pittsburgh's suburban communities. Other neighborhoods started questioning their own HOA practices. Some people even called me for advice when they had disputes. I always told them the same thing. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. But also be smart about it. I'd gotten lucky. Things could have gone very differently. The following summer, a reporter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette contacted me. They were doing a feature on HOA abuses and wanted to include my story. I declined. I'd had enough publicity, and honestly, I didn't want to admit in print that I'd deliberately shut off that valve. Because here's the thing. I did do it. I knew exactly what would happen. I'm an HVAC technician. I understood that closing that valve during a hard freeze would cause those pipes to burst. It was calculated, deliberate sabotage, but it was also the only way to break free from an impossible situation. Linda had all the power. She had the HOA board behind her, she had the covenants and bylaws on her side, and she had the willingness to make my life hell through endless fines and violations. I couldn't out-bureaucrat her, couldn't out-lawyer her with my limited funds, couldn't reason with her. So I hit her where she was vulnerable. I took away the meeting hall she wanted so badly in a way that looked like an accident, and in doing so, I exposed the entire rotten structure she'd built. Was it ethical? Probably not. Was it legal? Technically, yes, since no one could prove I'd done anything wrong. Was it the right thing to do? That's the question I still wrestle with sometimes. But then, I remember Linda's smug face when she told me about the grass height violation. I remember the stack of threatening letters. I remember the moment she tried to send workers onto my property without permission to access my heating system. And I remember finding out she'd been stealing from every homeowner in the neighborhood while demanding we follow her petty rules. Yeah, I'm okay with what I did. The best part is that the new HOA board actually used the situation to improve things. They rewrote significant portions of the covenants, removing some of the more ridiculous restrictions. Grass height requirements were relaxed. Seasonal decoration rules were simplified. The violation fine structure was completely revamped to focus on actual problems rather than minor aesthetic issues. They even created an appeal process for violations, something Linda's board had never allowed. Homeowners could now challenge fines before an independent committee, rather than just accepting whatever the board decided. Riverside Meadows became a model for reasonable HOA governance. Other neighborhoods in the Pittsburgh area studied what Patricia and Frank's board had done and implemented similar reforms. It was a small revolution in suburban homeowner politics, and it all started because I closed a valve and let some pipes freeze. Would I recommend others do the same? No. Like I said, I got lucky. If they'd been able to prove what I'd done, I could have been on the hook for massive damages, possibly even criminal charges for vandalism or destruction of property. The risk was enormous. But sometimes, when you're backed into a corner by bullies who hide behind rules and regulations, you have to find creative solutions. You have to think strategically, document everything, and be willing to take calculated risks. Most importantly, you have to know when to stand up and say no. Not every fight is worth fighting, but some absolutely are. And when an HOA president is measuring your grass and demanding you subsidize their meetings while embezzling from community funds, that's definitely a fight worth having. 3 years after the initial incident, I refinanced my house. The appraiser commented on what a well-maintained neighborhood Riverside Meadows was, how engaged the community seemed, how reasonable the HOA guidelines were. My home value had increased by 15%, better than comparable properties in nearby subdivisions. Turns out that when an HOA actually serves its residents instead of terrorizing them, property values really do improve. Who knew? I ran into Patricia at the grocery store one afternoon. She told me they'd just finished paying off the loan they'd taken to buy out my share of the carriage house and renovate it. Best investment the HOA ever made, she said. We're actually making money renting it out for events now, and the neighborhood feels different, you know. People actually like living here. That's great, I said sincerely. Xavier, I know I've said it before, but thank you. If you hadn't stood up to Linda, we'd probably still be under her thumb. Most of us were too afraid of the fines and violations to push back. I just didn't want to pay to heat the meeting hall, I said with a slight grin. She laughed. Sure, that's all it was. We both knew it was more than that. It had become about principle, about fairness, about whether a homeowners association served the homeowners or ruled over them. In the end, the community had decided it should be the former. As I drove home that day, past houses with grass of various heights and garbage cans visible here and there, past decorations that didn't quite match the old approved lists, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not just because I'd won my personal battle, but because the whole neighborhood had won. The pipes had cracked. The system had failed. And from that failure, something better had grown. That's the thing about breaking things sometimes. Yes, there's destruction and chaos and mess. But it also creates space for something new, something better to take root. Linda Peterson learned that lesson the hard way, sitting in a prison cell. The old HOA board learned it when they lost their positions. And I learned that sometimes being an HVAC technician who knows exactly where the shutoff valves are located can be a powerful thing. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. Would I recommend it to others? Not without serious thought and preparation, but would I change anything about how it happened? Not a single thing. The meeting hall stays warm now, properly heated by a system the HOA owns and maintains. My house stays warm too, without the burden of subsidizing community meetings. And on cold winter nights, when the temperature drops and pipes everywhere are at risk of freezing, I sleep soundly knowing that all my valves are exactly where they should be. Open, closed, or somewhere in between. That's my choice to make. And that's exactly how it should be.